the good old summertime, in the good old summertime, strolling through...
Hi, and welcome to the third and final part of my discussion on Gilbert Jessop's legendary Test match innings from 1902, featuring author Simon Wilde. We resume our chat as Jessop sensationally reaches his century. He eventually scores his century with a late cut off Armstrong, the bowling of Warwick Armstrong. Do we have any reporting of how the crowd or indeed Jessop reacted when he brought up his 100?
Well, it's a good question how Jessop reacted. We don't actually know what he did particularly, but we do know, I'm pretty sure he didn't sort of, throw both arms up in the air and sort of run around and kiss his cap and all that stuff. Pretty sure that didn't happen. But the crowd did celebrate, and again, we imagine, and I don't think it's completely wrong, is that the public were far less demonstrative in those days than they would be now. But a lot of the eyewitness reports, do describe how sort of crazy the crowd went. They were delirious with excitement, really. And as you've read out the quote about the crowd, waving their hands and handkerchiefs and hats and the rest of it. Well, that happened again when he got to his 100, and bowler hats were being thrown in the air, and there was general mayhem, really. And what the accounts do describe is how the celebration was so sort of widespread that the game actually stopped. Well, now, again, when a player gets to 100, we're sort of quite used to the idea that the game stops for a couple of minutes whilst they celebrate. But I think in those days it was very unusual. But some of the reports say that the game stopped for several minutes, or some of them said, a couple of minutes, some said several. There was clearly quite a delay before the game could resume. So that gives us a good idea that it was mayhem, really, in the crowd. There was such excitement, as there would be later when England win the game. So I think the behaviour of the crowd on that day was a bit of I would say maybe it hadn't been seen before at an English ground. I think certainly in an English Test match, I can't think of an occasion when it might have happened. I suppose when Australia beat England for the first time in 1882 at the Oval, that would have been a shocking event. But given that England lost, I think there would have been a stunned silence rather than delirious cheering. So, and there wouldn't have been many Australians in the ground. So I think this was probably new territory in terms of crowd behaviour in England. I think a lot of people commented on the celebrations, and I think that's because it was unusual.
Yeah, and we also have to think, he scored his century, which is a remarkable individual feat, but at this point, the crowd's also cheering because they're still in the game, which when he walked to the crease seemed very unlikely. So there's still this hope that England will actually snatch victory. Jessop is finally dismissed shortly after for 104, and there's nice symmetry there with Trumper's innings from the previous test, which he scored before the lunch interval. He also scored 104. What's remarkable about Jessop's 104 is that it came off a team total of 139 runs. So his share was 104. Just remarkable. And in that share, Jackson scored 18. So going back to what we were discussing before, how Jackson assumed this more defensive, conservative style, George Hurst contributed 9 and the extras scored 8. So he's out for 104. Now comes the actual analysis of how fast he scored it. The official time given was, or the long-held theory is that he scored it in just 75 minutes, so an hour 15. That's the time which has long been associated with this innings. You did your own analysis. What did you find?
I thought, yes. I mean, there's it's an interesting subject, this, because I mean, who was keeping a record of the time, and how were they keeping it? There was a pavilion clock at the Oval on the roof, which the player is still there now. I mean, the clock might have changed, but it's in the same position and it looks the same to me. but the players and the umpires could see it, and it would have been the clock used by the umpires to decide when to start and stop play, etc. But you couldn't see that from the press box because that was underneath. The scorers couldn't see it. So who was keeping an official time, and how was it being done? Obviously, sort of timepieces then were far more erratic than they are today. My reading of it is, having read all the newspaper reports, the estimations of the time of various things to do with this match, not just Jessop's innings, but other innings and team innings, is that they vary quite a lot, more than 5 minutes each way. So I don't think we can necessarily trust them. And I think also there was a sense that, I mentioned this in the book, how at that period there was a bit of a sort of obsession with speed and men driving cars faster, trains going faster. We'd had the first 100-mile-an-hour car around this time. Trains were going at more than a mile a minute, so obviously 60 miles an hour. Sprinters were breaking records for time. There was quite a sort of thing about how men were getting faster at doing things. Athletic feats were being done faster, and I think there was a bias towards saying Jessop got there faster than he did, and also so they always rounded it up to 5 minutes, or rounded it down to 5 minutes rather. So even if they'd known he was batting 78 minutes, they'd say 75. Very few of the accounts, but some of them do, give a timing that's not rounded up to or down to 5 minutes. So I've forensically gone through all the timings. And also the other thing, the clue, I suppose, the best clue is that the over rates were so fast in those days. They would get through 20 overs an hour, and there were no delays for, DRS reviews or drinks breaks
Yes.
or, well, in fact, there were no interruptions really in play, unless you lost the ball perhaps in the crowd. Or somebody was injured. So James Kelly, the Australian wicketkeeper, was hit by a bail. Somebody with Tom Hayward, I think, was bowled, and the bail flew up and hit Kelly in the face, and he was quite badly hurt. And so there was a bit of a delay whilst he got some treatment. But otherwise, play did not stop for anything. They just kept playing. So, and they kept up a rate of 20 overs an hour. So on that basis, we're working to 3 minutes per over throughout the match. And I can tell from the first and second days that that's pretty much what they kept to. Sometimes when a lot of wickets fell in a session, it might be slightly slower, obvious reasons, but you can work to 3 minutes per over pretty rigorously. And okay, if Jessop had an over where he'd taken 4 fours off the over, maybe assume it's taken a little bit longer than that. But just working on that rough rule of thumb, I was able to break down the innings, and it fitted pretty well with anecdotal evidence about what time they'd taken. The other factor to bear in mind in terms of how long he batted was in terms of his overall innings. As we discussed, when he got to 100, the game stopped for a few minutes. Yet a lot of the accounts say he batted 75 minutes to get to 100 and only 77 minutes for his whole innings. He faced 4 more balls after getting to a century before he was out. And there's the delay for the celebration of the 100, and yet some of the accounts were only adding 2 minutes on. Well, clearly they're not counting the stoppage for the celebration for the 100. So there's a lot of inaccuracies in there that you can quite easily pick up on. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I concluded that he actually took 80 minutes to get to his 100, and then he batted 5, so that's 5 minutes more than generally accepted, and 85 minutes for the whole innings. I've added, so another 4 balls and a bit of a celebration, 3 minutes maybe for the celebration, 85 minutes in all. So yes, that was another detective job really, to try and work out the time.
Yes.
But it's that was an interesting process.
Yeah, and we've spoken about it already, but the other analysis, of course, through modern eyes, we want to be able to compare it to modern cricket. So the other analysis is how many balls faced as part of Jessop's innings. So you argue in your book that he faced between 72 and 74 balls for his century. What's interesting is, because that's fewer than the generally accepted view, that would actually move him up the order of the on the list of the overall fastest Test century by an English batsman. It moved him up 4 places to number 11 overall. So could you just, again, quickly take us through how you worked this out?
Okay, so the Gerald Brodger book of 1974 included a cutting from the Jessop family scrapbooks. We didn't know what paper it was. With the help of the Jessop family, we worked out that it came from the Athletic News, which is a respected weekly sports paper. Came out 5 days after the match. That listed every ball that Jessop faced, and it said that it suggested that Jessop took 76 balls to get to his 100. That was the only known source for the 76 ball claim that has been accepted ever since Brodribb's book, really. Bill Frindle, when he ran Wisden's records, he put it into the... Once in the 1980s, we had Ian Botham getting 2 quick hundreds in the 81 Ashes series. Then we got Viv Richards getting 100 off 56 balls against England in Antigua in 1986. Suddenly there was a lot of interest in what the fastest Test hundreds were, and people started scouting around for earlier cases. Gerald Brodribb himself wrote an article in the Wisden Almanac about fast hundreds and reminded everyone the Jessop 100 took 76 balls. He was basing that on the cutting he'd used. There was no other evidence, though, and the part of the reason I did the book was because nobody had ever really gone into the Jessop innings properly and given it a thorough examination. That's why I did it. In the course of my researches, I have been greatly helped by the British Newspaper Archive, which is now digitized. So basically, you can sit at home at your desk rather than going to a newspaper library and thumbing through newspapers yourself. You can, and it's searchable, so you can put in Gilbert Jessop, for the day after the game, and you will come up with many newspaper reports. So it's a lot easier than it was, though still complicated. And I ended up finding all sorts of newspapers that that had good accounts of the match that I would never have thought of looking at, and I discovered a newspaper called the Morning Leader that was a London morning paper. It got merged with the Daily News, that was a better known newspaper in England, liberal paper set up by Charles Dickens in the 1800s. So the Morning Leader sort of isn't remembered now at all as a newspaper worth looking at, but actually it was very good at sports coverage. And amazingly, on the day after the game, it had a ball-by-ball list of Jessop's innings. And not only did it have a list of the balls faced, it also told you who was bowling at the time. And furthermore, if Jessop didn't score off the ball, it would tell you whether he played a shot at it or whether he left it. So whether he'd hit, he'd hit it and the fielder had stopped it, or whether he just let it go. So this is amazing. That was an amazing, sophisticated detail for the time. It's the sort of thing that would happen Bill Frindle would have done it, and all the scorers, of modern scorers now would keep a note of that sort of stuff. But back then, it was completely new, and I've not really read or found any other cases of people doing something similar. In fact, Charles Davis, who runs a stats website in Australia that some of your listeners may know of, he's done a lot of work in early scorebooks. He's done a lot of research into early scorebooks, and he found somebody in Australia who was keeping similar sorts of notes around that time, actually a little bit later than 1902. But it was groundbreaking stuff, and so I was very surprised when I found this cutting. But obviously, it was like a eureka moment, because I thought, "Hang on, this is amazing." And I quickly realised that it was coming up with a different answer from the Athletic News cutting. So basically, we had two. Basically, in a nutshell, we have 2 ball-by-ball lists for the Jessop innings now rather than 1. And as I think I said earlier, by marrying those 2 up and also going through the newspaper accounts carefully, I've managed to reconstruct all the overs that took place whilst Jessop was at the crease. The other little detail is that because Jessop was batting between 1 o'clock, 10 past 1, and about 3:15 when he got out, that was sort of the time that the London evening newspapers were going to press, and also the English regional evening papers were going to press. So basically, lots of journalists in the press box were writing reports for their evening papers as the innings was unfolding, and so they put in a lot of detail about the shots that Jessop played and what was happening in the game. So it was like a sort of running commentary, and there were lots of them, of what was happening. So that helped me reconstruct the innings, because there was a lot of people telling us about pretty much every over of the innings, so that they helped. But the morning leader list was the crucial thing, because it gave you who was bowling, and it gave you a sort of sequential list. But the morning leader list and the athletic news list are very similar. They're not that different, which is reassuring. So it suggests that actually you can trust them both. And anyone who suggests that Jessop's innings is not the fastest 100 for England, I mean, it's ridiculous, because the evidence of found, all this evidence points to his 100 being in anything between 71 balls and 76, if you like. It's in that range. Nothing suggests that it's slower than that. So that's reassuring, really. I could have discovered that, in fact, he scored his 100 of 85 balls or something. It could be something completely different and not very encouraging for Jessop's point of view in terms of the record. But contrary, I think it supports the idea that it was very fast, and faster than anything else we've seen.
Come home and tell your mother, your father and your brother that they better keep their eyes on you.
So, Simon, as is known, this match becomes known to history as Jessop's match. England win by 1 wicket. They lose the overall series 2-1, but it was looking like they weren't going to win at all at one stage. So Jessop obviously has his name etched in history forever. Just quickly, before we sum everything up, he never really recreated his heroics, did he? Or he never did anything quite like that again. Can you describe just quickly, say, the rest of his cricket career?
Well, he carried on playing until the First World War broke out in 1914, and that was the end. But he was 40 by that point. So had there been no war, he wasn't going to play much longer, I don't suppose. He continued to do some pretty amazing things in county cricket, and remained a great entertainer, and the crowds loved him. It was always fun watching him bat, even if he didn't come off. Whilst he was at the crease, he'd be worth watching. But he did have a lot of success still. But he didn't do much for England. He played the first test in 1905, got dropped. He was out first ball in the first test. Jackson kind of lost faith in him, and picked other people. He played in the 1909 Ashes series in England, got injured. That was the end of his summer. That was a back problem. Interestingly, actually, the series following 1902 was in Australia, 1903-04. Pelham Warner took the team to Australia. England won. It was a famous series from English point of view, a famous win. Jessop didn't go, partly because Lord Northcliffe, who owned the Daily Mail, and was transforming the British newspaper market, wanted the star of the 1902 series to write columns about the 1903-04 tour from England using cables, and so he paid Jessop to stay at home and write for him about the series. So that was one of the reasons why Jessop didn't go on the next Australia tour, was because he was being paid to write newspaper articles about it.
Right.
Which was, as we've discussed, acceptable income for an amateur cricketer. So that's why he didn't play them. But he didn't play that much more Test cricket. Obviously, there were fewer series in those days. He did play against South Africa in 1907, 3 Test series, and he played a spectacular innings at Lord's against an attack that included some of the South African googly bowlers that will become sort of very well known, the early pioneers of googly bowling. And he smashed 93 off 64 balls when he was out. When people say what's the closest anyone's come to beating Jessop's record from 1902, the answer is Jessop himself, because in that inning, he could have got to 100 in something under 70 balls quite easily. 93 off 64. He could easily have got another 7 runs off 5 or 6 more balls, so he would have taken the record down to something in the high 60s. But he didn't. But he is the nearest, in a way, to beating his own record. So that was probably the other great day he had. But obviously that was South Africa, not Australia, so it's maybe not as well remembered. But that was his other great day of Test cricket, really.
It is one of those oddities, peculiar things. You touched on it earlier. I mean, two of the great names of certainly English cricket in the golden age, C.B. Fry and Gilbert Jessop, tremendous batsmen, certainly at first class level. But when you look at their test records, collectively, they both score, collectively, they score 3 test centuries, even though I think Fry scored 94 first class centuries and Jessop over 50. So there is this sort of asterisk, I suppose, against their name that they often didn't perform to their best in Test cricket. But, again, that's up for debate. But it does look odd when you look at the record books. So, Simon, towards the end of your book, you have this beautiful phrase, which I'm going to just quote here. And you note, quote, "In no calendar year between 1922 and 1974 was the rate of scoring in Test cricket as fast as it was in 1902. Jessop was cherished as a symbol of a vanished era and a lost spirit of adventure." So do you think when, the phrase the golden age of cricket really comes into the public mind in the mid 20th century, thanks to writers like Neville Cardus and A. Thompson, do you think that they had Jessop in mind when they were using that phrase?
Oh yeah, I should think so. Jessup and Trumper, people like that. There was a spirit of adventure, I suppose, about the way they played. A sort of slightly freewheeling approach that was lost later. So I mean, these people are writing about an earlier age, but they're thinking about their own age and the cricket in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. I mean, the 50s was pretty attritional stuff. The golden age was a vanished age by that point. It was hard to imagine, how it had ever happened because it was so different from the cricket that was being played by the 50s. I mean, Cardus wrote an essay in the 50s about Jessop, and at the time he was writing, the scoring rate in Test cricket was like 2 runs and over. It's unimaginably slow now.
Mm.
So yeah, he was talking about a vanished age and with longing really, and some regret that it wasn't still around. So yeah, it's partly a reflection of the time he was living in when he wrote it, and there was a lot of that going on. A. Thompson, similar sort of thing, really. But yeah, cricket became far more attritional. It was being the old amateur players died out. Really, they couldn't afford to play. They wanted to be paid. By 1963 in England, the distinction between amateurs and professionals had been scrapped, but it'd been scrapped because there were no amateurs. As simple as that, really.
Mm.
And people were playing for the places, and they had a living to make, and they weren't going to chuck their wicket away trying to slog sweep anyone anywhere. Really, it was a different mindset, and cricket only really regained its spirit of adventure with one-day cricket in the 60s. I mean, I guess the West Indians
Mm.
of the 60s were pretty, Gary Sabers, people like that were great entertainers. But really, it was one-day cricket that revived everything and brought back the stroke play into the game, really.
Yeah, and I'm reminded of that. I think it was Richie Benaud who said that Gilbert Jessop was the greatest one-day player to have never played the game.
All honor to the sons of England in crime.
If you'd like to support the Golden Age of Cricket podcast, you can do so with a tiny financial donation, as much as a cup of coffee. Visit buymeacoffee.com/Golden Age of Cricket. So one final question for you, Simon, and it's in relation to Bazball, the age we now live in, and we are recording this podcast in the wake of a fabulous test series between England and India, 2025 in the English summer. It seems like Jessop's record could be broken at any stage. We saw some very quick centuries made in this recent summer test series. And although records are made to be broken, Is there a romantic side to you that hopes that this particular record is never broken?
Well, I've lived through some anxious moments in the last 12 months writing this book, because I thought when I started that I would be writing a book about the Jessop innings, but also about the innings that would break it. I'd said to, I think, someone I was talking to at the outset of this project that, let's keep sort of a section at the back of the book for, Harry Brook or Ben Duckett or whatever, and we'll describe his innings that breaks the Jessop record. But although there were some near misses, it hasn't happened. And yeah, I mean, Jamie Smith got 100 off 80 balls in the Edgbaston Test a few weeks ago. And at one point, he was 84 off 61, at which point I was convinced he was going to do it. So it's been a sort of, once you start, once you start thinking about this thing, it sort of takes over your life, really. You watch every innings in a different way, because you think, well, if he keeps going at this rate, he's going to break the record. So it's a slightly mad way of living your life, really. But I do expect the record to be broken by one of these guys, and I sort of feel like it'd be a shame if they didn't, because given the adventurous way they play, it feels like one of them should. But I don't know. I was sort of thinking these guys they've clearly got the capacity to absolutely destroy a bowler. And we saw Jamie Smith taking sort of 20 odd runs off a Prasid Krishna over Edgbaston. And you think, well, what if they can do it once? Why doesn't he just keep doing it? But they tend to go through, I think one of the reasons they've not done it is because they go through little sort of passages. They'll have a sort of mood of 15 minutes where they'll go berserk, and then they actually think there might be a bowling change or something, whatever, but they just like have a pause, and then they'll just defend an over for no apparent reason, really. They'll just take a breather and then go again. And maybe it's because they don't want to get out and they're thinking, this is a test match, I need to take a slightly longer view. And so they'll go quiet for a little while. And I think maybe that's why they haven't done it, because clearly they've got the shots to smash this record, really. But I think it will.
Possibly higher stakes, you could argue as well. I mean, they probably, the competitiveness for being in that first, the English 11, it must be probably greater than it was 120 years ago. But you never know. I mean, I agree with you. I think it's only a matter of time before it's broken. And if anyone's going to do it, it's the current crop of English cricketers, but we'll wait and see. But thank you very much for being a guest on today's podcast. It's been fascinating. I applaud you for your latest book. So it's called Chasing Jessop, The Mystery of England Cricket's Oldest Record. And it's out now, and I cannot recommend it enough, not only for the dissection of Jessop's famous innings, but also for, a history of cricket at that time, the history of reporting, newspapers, the invention of cable, and also a lot about Jessop's life. So congratulations, and thanks again for being my guest.
Well, thank you so much, Tom. Nice to talk to you.
That's all from me in today's episode. Don't forget to like or subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. My name is Tom Ford, and until next time, it's bye for now.